Thank you very much, Mr. Feinberg. I thank you, and I thank your staff for the tremendous work that you've been doing. I think we all really appreciate it. I have questions in two areas, but first a brief statement. Trying to figure out what's the, quote, right level of compensation obviously ultimately is an arbitrary decision. But there's been a premise in corporate America that the more you're paid, the more you're worth. Disgraced and incompetent executives who walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars, Stanley Neal, Richard Fold, the list goes on, have proven that to be wrong. And I think the two concerns that we have here in Congress are, one, what compensation practices are going to drive a constructive business model so that bankers make money by lending rather than ripping folks off on kite schemes like subprime mortgages. And then number two, with respect to the taxpayer bailout, which was presented to us as something that had to be done even if we didn't want to do it. How can we get some of that money back for the American taxpayer? And this isn't in your purview, but it's a question I want to ask because you probably have more practical experience on this than anyone in America, and certainly more than any of us on the committee. Among the TARP recipients was Goldman Sachs. They've since paid that money back with interest. And Goldman Sachs is good at what it does, and it's now on track to have another year of record profits and likely to award bonus $100 billion. AIG took the taxpayer money and wrote a $12.9 billion check to Goldman to cover collateral debt obligations and some of these exotic instruments that were in jeopardy because of the collapse of AIG. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not Goldman Sachs should repay taxpayers that $12.9 billion before it awards $21 billion in bonuses to its employees?
Congressman, I don't have an opinion. I've read that story just as others have. I have enough difficulty focusing on the 7 companies that are on my watch, and whether or not Goldman should either voluntarily or by force of Congress, congressional directive, repay.
Well, let me ask you this. I understand you have a limited purview, and I can't tell you that nobody's listening and it's just between us. But I know that one of your concerns is taxpayer fairness. And again, that's in the eye of the beholder, but it's a fairness standard. And one of the things that we've learned in this entire catastrophe of the financial meltdown is that most of the things that were done that are truly outrageous and harmful to taxpayers in our economy were all legal. Legal, but not fair and not right. And if we're going to restore some sense of fairness that the American taxpayer needs, do you think that we've got to address such transfers where the goal of the taxpayer bailout was to revive the financial system but not to reward any individual firm?
Yes, I'm hopeful that the model that we have developed for the 7 companies that's in this report, and executive compensation is not the answer to all of these problems, but to the extent that executive compensation has a role to play going forward in improving the economy and in promoting fairness, I'd like to think that the recommendations we have made in this report might be adopted voluntarily by other companies on Wall Street, and might be seen as one step among many that can be taken to deal with the overall problem.
Okay, thank you. I yield back to, thank you, Mr. Feinberg.